My name is Emily Clark, and I'm 28 years old. Before I go any further, I want to ask you this. Where are you watching this from today? Drop your city or country in the comments. And as you hear my story, I'd love you to rate it from 1 to 10 at the end, because your voice matters, and your reactions give life to these tales. Let me take you back to the moment everything changed. I believed in love, messy, beautiful, imperfect love, and I trusted fully. I gave my heart without reservations. But then he said those words I will never forget. We'll always be friends, though. At the time, I smiled and replied, absolutely. Because I wanted to believe him. I wanted to think that even if things fell apart, we would still hold some connection, some warmth left between us. That faith in friendship, that acceptance, was more terrifying and beautiful than any conflict. But weeks later, I realized how wrong I had been about what always meant to him, and what it meant to me. I had wanted closure, honesty, and dignity, not a limp apology or a "we'll stay friends" line that stung more than any argument ever could. So here is my story. Heartbreak, betrayal, discovery, and redemption. From the outside, he seemed perfect, charismatic, creative, ambitious. But inside, he carried doubts, secrets, and voices I didn't always hear. We had met in a small cafe one rainy afternoon, me sketching in my notebook, he sitting opposite, glancing up at the window, lost in thought. A spark ignited in conversations about art, life, dreams. I believed he saw me, and for a while that was enough. We built memories together, late-night drives, whispered promises, shared playlists. But somewhere along the way, the distance crept in. I felt the shift before he spoke the words. A text unanswered, a call dropped, a laugh that felt forced. When he finally looked at me with a shadow in his eyes and said, "I think we need a break," my heart backed away, but I clung to the promise of friendship like a lifeline. "We'll always be friends," he repeated. I nodded, swallowed the pain, and said, "Absolutely." Because to me, friends meant trust, meaning, depth, even after love changes shape. I remember that first week after our breakup like it was wrapped in fog, everything blurred at the edges. I still had his messages saved, his hoodie draped over the back of my chair, his toothbrush next to mine in the bathroom. Little ghosts of a life I hadn't yet learned to bury. People tell you to move on, but they never tell you how. They never warn you that it's not the silence that hurts most, it's the echoes. His laughter would show up in my memory like a song you can't stop humming, and even though I tried to delete every trace, something in me kept holding on. I told myself we were friends now, that being civil and mature was the right thing to do. But deep down, I knew I was still waiting for him to text me first. I kept replaying our last conversation, wondering if I'd said something wrong, if I'd missed the moment I could have saved us. I tried distracting myself with work, friends, gym sessions, anything to fill the void he'd left. But every night, when the world quieted, I'd find myself scrolling through his social media, seeing his smile in new photos, his jokes in comment sections, his name still glowing on my screen like it hadn't burned me yet. Then, one evening, it hit me like a wave I didn't see coming. He'd posted a photo, him at a party, drink in hand, arm around someone new. The caption said, "Good vibes only." I stared at it for a long time, trying to feel nothing, but my chest tightened anyway. I wasn't jealous. Not exactly. It was more the realization that while I was sitting there trying to make peace with the past, he was already rewriting his present without me in it. I wanted to hate him for moving on so fast, but I couldn't. That's not how love leaves you. It doesn't just disappear. It decays slowly, turning tenderness into questions you'll never get answered. So I texted him, something small, something safe. "Hope you're doing well." He replied, hours later, "Yeah, I'm great." You? That was it.
No worms. No curiosity.
Just a polite exchange between two people pretending not to miss what they'd lost. I put my phone down and whispered to myself, this is what friendship feels like now. That night, I made a decision. If we were going to be friends, then I'd learn how to live like one, without expecting his calls, without reading between the lines of his words. I would rebuild myself one quiet day at a time. But healing isn't linear, and strength doesn't come without scars. And as the weeks went on, I discovered something that turned my entire world upside down. Something that made "we'll always be friends" sound more like an insult than a promise. Would you have stayed friends with someone who broke your heart? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and how you would have handled it. Because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about love, forgiveness, and self-respect. A few days after that, I was at a small coffee shop downtown, the one with the brick walls and mismatched chairs, trying to convince myself that being alone didn't have to feel so lonely. I was sipping on my latte, scrolling absentmindedly through my phone when a notification popped up. A mutual friend had tagged him in a photo. Against my better judgment, I clicked. It was him, of course, smiling wide, that same careless smile I used to fall asleep thinking about. But this time, he wasn't alone. Standing next to him was the same girl from that party photo, her hand barely resting against his chest. My heart sank in that slow, familiar way, like watching a ship you built yourself drift further into the horizon, knowing it won't come back. And the worst part? The caption read, "Can't believe it's already been 2 months with this one." 2 months. I did the math in my head. 2 months before the breakup. That's when I knew he hadn't just moved on fast. He'd already moved on before I ever got the chance to let go. Suddenly, every late night "I'm tired, talk later" text, every weekend he said he needed space, made sense. The puzzle fit together cruelly, perfectly. I felt this mix of anger and sadness bubbling inside me, the kind that makes your hands tremble even when you're sitting still. But instead of crying, I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it felt unreal. After everything we'd shared, after all those promises, this was how it ended? With lies disguised as kindness? With "we'll always be friends," meaning "I'll keep you close enough to ease my guilt"? I wanted to confront him, to demand an explanation. But something in me whispered no. He'd already said everything through his actions. So instead, I blocked his number, deleted his photos, and even though it felt like tearing pages from a story I wasn't done reading, I did it. That night, I took his hoodie, the one I'd kept like a comfort blanket, and walked it to the dumpster behind my apartment. I stood there for a moment, holding it, remembering how it smelled like his cologne the first time he hugged me. Then I let it go. The next morning, I woke up early, made myself coffee, and looked at the sunlight pouring through my kitchen window. It wasn't the same kind of morning. It was quiet, but peaceful. And for the first time in months, I felt the tiniest flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. Not the loud, triumphant kind people post online about, but the quiet realization that I didn't need to be part of a story anymore to write my own. Still, healing isn't about forgetting. It's about forgiving yourself for staying too long. And as much as I tried to move forward, fate had other plans. Because just when I thought the chapter was over, something unexpected happened. Something that would test every bit of strength I thought I had gained. Tell me, if you were in my place, would you forgive someone who betrayed your trust like that? Or would you walk away for good? Let me know where you're watching from. I love seeing how far our little story family reaches. And don't forget to rate this story from 1 to 10, because what happens next, I promise, you won't see coming. It happened on a random Thursday, one of those gray, sleepy days when you expect nothing to happen at all. I had just come from work, my tote bag slung over my shoulder, when I saw him. He was standing in the lobby of the same company where I'd recently started as an assistant to one of the senior partners. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. Maybe it was just someone who looked like him. But then he turned around, and my heart did that stupid, involuntary skip, the kind it had no business doing anymore. There he was, in a crisp suit, talking to my boss like he belonged there. My fingers clenched around the strap of my bag. The man who once called me his everything now stood across the room as if I had never existed. When my boss called me over to introduce me, I swear I felt the world tilt a little. "This is our new consultant, Nathan," my boss said, smiling. And then, with that perfect timing that life seems to have for cruelty, he added, "Nathan, meet Emily, one of the brightest people in our team." For a moment, Nathan froze. His lips parted slightly, as if he wanted to speak but couldn't. I met his gaze, steady and cold, pretending I didn't know him. Nice to meet you, I said flatly, extending my hand. He took it, his grip tight, familiar. You too, he replied, his voice softer, hesitant. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Seeing him had cracked something open that I thought was sealed for good. I sat by my window, staring at the city lights, thinking about how strange it was that people could cross paths again after all that pain. Not because they were meant to, but because the world isn't as big as we think. I wondered if he remembered the sound of my laugh, the way I used to leave little notes in his jacket pocket.
But none of that mattered now.
I wasn't the same girl who waited by her phone hoping he'd text. I was someone who had rebuilt herself from the ashes of his silence. Days passed, and working with him was like walking a tightrope over old memories. He'd glance at me during meetings, his eyes searching for the warmth I refused to give. Sometimes he'd linger by my desk, asking meaningless questions just to talk. Once, when I was leaving late, he offered to walk me to my car. I declined with a polite smile. That's when he finally said it. You've changed, Emily. I looked at him, straight into his eyes, and said, No, Nathan. I just stopped pretending. He didn't know what to say after that. For the first time, the silence between us wasn't my weakness. It was his. Still, part of me wondered if closure ever really comes. Because even though I'd moved on, a piece of my heart still ached. Not for him, but for the version of me that believed he'd stay. I learned something that day, that healing isn't a straight line. It loops, it burns, and sometimes it brings you face to face with the very person who broke you just so you can see how far you've come. And as life would have it, fate wasn't done playing with irony. Because a week later, something happened that would flip our story completely. My boss called me into his office and said, Emily, we're promoting you. You'll be leading the new project, with Nathan as your subordinate. The look on his face when he found out? Priceless. Tell me honestly, if you were in my shoes, would you enjoy that revenge, or would you still feel sorry for him? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to tell me where you're watching from. And if you're still with me, make sure you've subscribed to Outstanding Stories, because the twist that's coming next is one you won't forget. When the promotion became official, it felt like a quiet victory the universe had been saving just for me. I didn't gloat, didn't rub it in Nathan's face. I didn't have to. The way he looked at me said everything. The first meeting I led as a superior was in the same conference room where I used to fetch coffee as an intern years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. As I stood at the head of the table, presenting my vision for the upcoming campaign, Nathan sat across, his pen still, his eyes glued to me. Every sentence I spoke carried a confidence he never thought I was capable of. Every decision I made reminded him that the girl he once dismissed had become a woman who commanded rooms he could only walk into by invitation. After the meeting, he came to my office, hovering at the door like a stranger who didn't know how to begin. Emily, he started, voice soft, almost nervous. I didn't look up from my computer. Something wrong, Mr. Turner? I asked, keeping it professional. He sighed, stepped closer. I just wanted to say congratulations. You've really done well for yourself. I finally looked at him, calm, collected, untouchable. I didn't need your validation back then, and I don't need it now. But thank you. The words hit him harder than I expected. He nodded, took a deep breath, and left quietly. When the door closed, I leaned back in my chair and exhaled. It wasn't triumph I felt, it was peace. Real peace. The kind that comes when you no longer need someone's apology to forgive yourself. But life, as always, had another twist waiting. A few weeks later, our company got an invitation to pitch a major campaign for an international client, a deal that could redefine our firm's future. I was chosen to lead it, and Nathan was assigned to assist me. The days leading up to the presentation were intense. Late nights, endless revisions, sleepless brainstorming. And somewhere in between, the wall between us began to crack. One evening, when everyone else had left, I caught him staring at an old photo I kept near my desk, one of my team and me laughing after a big win. You look happy, he murmured. I am, I said simply. Then he asked the question I never expected. Do you ever regret anything about us? I paused, then shook my head. I regret not knowing my worth sooner. That's all. He didn't respond, but the guilt in his eyes said more than words ever could. The night before the presentation, he confessed something that shifted everything. He told me that the reason he left me wasn't just cold-heartedness, it was fear. Fear of commitment, of failure, of not being enough. "You were always too much for me, Emily," he said, voice trembling. "Too kind, too passionate, too strong. I thought you'd see what a mess I was and walk away first, so I did it before you could." For a moment, I just stared at him. Then, quietly, I said, "You're right, Nathan. I would have walked away eventually, but not because you weren't enough. Because I would have realized I deserved someone who thought they were." He looked shattered, and I knew that was the closure I had needed all along. The next morning, we nailed the presentation. Our pitch was flawless, our teamwork impeccable, like two people who had finally learned how to exist without hurting each other. When the client shook my hand and called me the future face of leadership, I smiled. Not for them. For the girl I used to be, the one who cried into her pillow when he left, the one who thought her story had ended there. That night, as I sat in my apartment watching the city lights flicker, a notification popped up on my phone. It was a message from Nathan. Just 4 words. "You proved me wrong." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Some stories don't need an ending. They just need a lesson to sow. If you've ever been left behind, belittled, or told you weren't enough, remember this. Someday, someone will look at you and realize you were everything they couldn't handle. Until then, keep growing, keep shining, and keep believing in your own comeback. Crescent Moon, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And rate this story from 1 to 10. How much did it hit your heart? Don't forget to subscribe to Outstanding Stories, where every story reminds you that sometimes the heartbreak isn't the ending, it's the beginning of your rise. Red Heart Sparkles. It's strange how life feels different once you reclaim your power. After that final message from Nathan, something inside me finally clicked, not out of anger, but out of acceptance. The weight that used to sit heavy on my chest every night was gone. I wasn't living to prove anything anymore. I was living because I wanted to. My mornings no longer began with a memory. They began with purpose. I'd stand in front of my mirror, smooth my hair, put on my blazer, and smile at the woman staring back. She wasn't perfect, but she was real. And real was enough. The weeks after our big presentation were like watching my own evolution unfold. My boss invited me to join the executive team, the youngest member in the company's history. My ideas were being heard, my confidence respected. But the best part? None of it had anything to do with Nathan. For the first time, I wasn't someone's ex, someone's daughter, someone's assistant. I was simply me. That realization hit harder than any apology ever could. Nathan still worked there, of course. Our interactions were professional, calm, efficient, polite. But every now and then, I'd catch him watching me during meetings, that same mixture of admiration and regret lingering in his eyes. It wasn't satisfaction I felt anymore. It was gratitude. Because without that heartbreak, I never would have found this version of myself. Without the fire, there'd be no strength in my soul, no voice in my heart that whispered, "You're enough." One evening, our firm hosted a gala to celebrate the company's growth. I arrived in a sleek black dress, confident and radiant. As I walked through the crowd, people congratulated me, some for the promotion, some for the project, others just for how far I'd come. And then, through the sea of faces, I saw Nathan again. He looked different this time, not arrogant, not proud, just human. When he approached me, he hesitated, then smiled faintly. "You look incredible," he said quietly. I smiled back, kind but distant. "Thank you, Nathan. You look better too." He chuckled softly, lowering his gaze. "Emily, I hope someday you'll believe me when I say I never stopped caring." I took a deep breath and replied, "I believe you, but that doesn't mean we belong in each other's lives." It was gentle, but it was final. And it set me free completely. Later that night, as I stood on the balcony overlooking the city, I realized something powerful. Healing isn't about pretending it never hurt. It's about reaching a place where you can remember without breaking. Where the past no longer defines you, it simply reminds you how far you've come. I smiled, feeling the cool breeze brush against my skin, and whispered to myself, "You did it." If you've ever been through something similar, if someone once made you question your worth, just know this. One day, they'll see the light you became after they left. They'll remember your laughter, your kindness, your strength, and they'll wonder how they ever let you go. But by then, you'll be too busy living the life you built for yourself to care. Rose, 6 months later, life felt like it had found its rhythm again. Mornings were no longer lonely, not because someone had replaced Nathan, but because I'd finally learned how to fill my own silence. I had moved into a sunlit apartment overlooking the river, filled with plants, books, and the quiet hum of peace. My career was thriving, my team respected me, and I was mentoring younger women who reminded me of myself, bright, capable, and still learning to believe they deserved good things. But as complete as I felt, the universe still had a surprise waiting for me. IT started on an ordinary Wednesday. I was running late for a meeting, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, when I accidentally bumped into someone in the lobby. My papers went flying, and so did his. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," I said, kneeling to help him. He chuckled softly, kneeling too. "No harm done. Happens to the best of us." When I looked up, I saw warm brown eyes and a kind smile that instantly disarmed me. His name was Ryan Matthews, a new consultant brought in from the New York office. There was something calm about him. No arrogance, no games, just quiet confidence. As we gathered our things, he smiled again. "Maybe fate's just trying to make us lay together." I laughed, genuinely, for the first time in a while. Over the next few weeks, our paths kept crossing: project meetings, coffee breaks, late nights working on proposals. Unlike Nathan, Ryan never tried to impress me. He listened. He asked about my ideas, my goals, even my favorite books. There was an ease in his presence, like breathing after years of holding my breath. One night, as we left the office, he said something that stayed with me. "You know, Emily, people spend so much time trying to find someone who makes them feel complete. But the real magic happens when you meet someone who reminds you that you already are." That one sentence struck deeper than he could have known. We started spending more time together. Weekend hikes, coffee dates that turned into long talks about everything and nothing. I found myself smiling without forcing it, laughing without guilt. He wasn't a replacement for Nathan. He was proof that love could be soft, not chaotic. Gentle, not conditional. He respected my space, admired my strength, and never tried to fix me, because he saw I wasn't broken. One evening, as we sat watching the sunset by the river, he reached for my hand and said quietly, "You're the kind of woman who turns pain into poetry." I didn't reply. I just leaned my head on his shoulder, feeling the peace that comes only when you've healed enough to love again. But here's what I've learned. Sometimes the love story isn't about finding someone new. It's about rediscovering yourself so completely that when someone good finally appears, you don't lose yourself this time. You recognize love not as a rescue, but as a partnership. That's what Ryan became, not a savior, but a mirror reflecting back the light I had fought so hard to find. The months that followed were some of the most peaceful of my entire life. Ryan and I built something slow and steady, the kind of love that didn't need grand gestures to feel real. We'd cook dinner together after work, laughing over burned pasta or spilled sauce, or take late-night walks through the quiet streets when the city lights blurred softly in the distance. It wasn't perfect, but it was safe. And maybe that's what real love feels like, not butterflies, but calm oceans. I remember one night, while we were sitting on my couch watching old movies, Ryan turned to me and said, "You don't look at love like other people do." I smiled faintly and replied, "That's because I learned it the hard way." In truth, the past never disappeared. It just stopped controlling me. There were moments when memories of Nathan would flicker through my mind, not with pain, but with quiet understanding. Sometimes, when I saw couples arguing in restaurants or friends venting about heartbreaks, I realized how easy it is to lose yourself when you think love means proving your worth. I used to believe I had to earn love. Now I knew that real love didn't demand proof. It saw you, flaws and all, and stayed anyway. Ryan showed me that. He never compared me to anyone, never tried to outshine my strength. He admired it. That kind of love didn't burn, it healed. One evening, we attended a charity event for the company, the same company where everything had once fallen apart. It was surreal walking into that ballroom again, the chandeliers glimmering, the same scent of roses and champagne filling the air. I wore a crimson dress, the kind that demanded attention without asking for it. Heads turned as we walked in together, but my eyes found one familiar face, Nathan. He was there too, alone, his expression unreadable. For a brief second, our eyes met, and in that instant, I saw everything. The apology he never voiced, the regret he could never fix, and the acceptance that came too late. I smiled politely, then turned back to Ryan, who placed his hand gently on the small of my back. That moment wasn't about revenge. It was closure. I realized that true power doesn't come from proving someone wrong. It comes from no longer needing to. Nathan was part of my story, yes, but no longer the center of it. I had outgrown that chapter. I had turned the pain into something purposeful, the heartbreak into wisdom. And as I looked around that glittering hall, surrounded by faces that once doubted me, I didn't feel small anymore. I felt infinite. Later that night, as Ryan and I walked out into the cool air, he looked at me and said softly, "You know, sometimes I feel like you're living a story people need to hear." I laughed. "Maybe I am," I replied, smiling up at him. "Maybe I already told it." It was early spring when I finally decided to write again. Not for work, not for reports, but for me. For the first time in years, I sat at my small wooden desk by the window, a cup of coffee steaming beside my laptop, and let the words flow. It started as a journal entry, just pieces of thoughts, memories, and confessions I had kept buried deep inside. But soon, those fragments began to shape themselves into something more, a story about love, loss, and rediscovery. I didn't plan to share it with anyone at first. It was my way of healing, of making sense of everything that had happened. But as the pages grew, I realized that maybe someone out there needed to read it too. Maybe someone who is crying in their car right now, thinking they'd never feel whole again, could find hope in my story. So, I began writing after we ended. It wasn't about Nathan or even about Ryan. It was about me, about every woman who had been told she was too emotional, too difficult, too much. About every person who had loved with their whole heart and been broken for it. Writing became my therapy, my mirror, and my voice. Sometimes, the tears blurred my screen as I typed. Sometimes, I laughed remembering the small, beautiful moments I once overlooked. The process was painful, but freeing. I wasn't writing a revenge story. I was writing a resurrection. Ryan was the first to read it. One night, I handed him a printed draft, unsure of what he'd think. He read it quietly for an hour, flipping through the pages, and when he finished, he didn't say a word at first. Then he looked up with soft eyes and said, "This isn't just your story, Emily. It's everyone's story. You just gave words to what so many people feel but can't say." That was the moment I realized I wanted to publish it. Not for fame, not for validation, but to help others find the strength I once searched for in the dark. The book came out 6 months later. I'll never forget the first message I received from a reader, a woman who wrote, "Your story saved me." I was ready to give up, and then I read your words. I sat in my living room, holding my phone, tears streaming down my face, realizing that pain doesn't lose its power when you share it, it transforms. I began speaking at small book events, coffee shops, and online forums. I'd tell people, healing isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering without breaking. And every time I saw a nod from the audience, I knew my journey had meaning. Nathan read the book too. I found out months later when he sent a short message that simply said, "You were right about everything. I'm glad you found peace." I stared at that message for a long time before deleting it, not out of anger, but because I didn't need it anymore. I had already forgiven him long ago. Not for him, but for myself. That was the final page of that chapter. After everything, I finally realized that love isn't about how long someone stays. It's about what they leave behind in you. When Aaron left, I thought he'd taken everything, my smile, my peace, my trust. But he didn't. He just forced me to rebuild it all for myself. I started journaling again, traveling, even volunteering at a local shelter, where people had lost more than I ever did. Every time I looked into someone's eyes who was trying to rebuild from nothing, I felt a spark of strength inside me, the same strength I thought I'd lost. And maybe that's the thing no one tells you about heartbreak. It breaks you, but it also sculpts you into someone who can stand taller, love deeper, and see clearer. Months later, I ran into Aaron again at a cafe, not by plan, just one of those cruel or maybe kind coincidences the universe throws at you. He looked different, maybe older, a bit tired, and when he saw me smiling genuinely, really smiling, he froze. We talked for a few minutes, awkwardly at first, like strangers sharing a memory. Then he said, "You seem happy." And I replied, "I am." That was it. No closure needed. No more what ifs. Just two people who had walked through love, pain, and realization, standing on opposite sides of peace. Later that night, I went home and sat on my balcony, watching the city lights blink like stars that never sleep. I thought about how I started this story. A girl in love, then a girl in pain, then a woman who found herself. I smiled because, for the first time, I wasn't telling a story about heartbreak anymore. I was telling a story about healing. And if you've ever been where I was, if someone ever told you, "We'll always be friends though," while breaking your heart, remember this. You can be friends with your past, but never chained to it. If you're watching this right now, tell me where you're from in the comments. I want to know who's listening, who's healing with me tonight. And if you felt something, even for a second, give this story a rating out of 10. Because maybe, just maybe, your story is still being written, and this is only your middle chapter, not the end. This is Emma, 27 years old, telling you my story from the other side of heartbreak. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying. Don't forget to subscribe to Outstanding Stories, where real emotions find their voice and every ending hides a new beginning. And before you scroll, remember, sometimes goodbye isn't the end. It's the start of who you were always meant to be.